Audio Unleashed. Hey, Brent Butterworth.
Hi, Dennis Berger.
It was really good seeing you this weekend, man. I haven't seen you face to face in a few years.
That's true. That's by your choice, not mine.
That's a good point. So, for anybody who doesn't know, Brent and I were actually guests on a 24-hour live stream on the Brightside Home Theater YouTube channel this weekend. Or actually, by the time people hear this, it will be 2 weekends ago, I think.
Yeah,
so
true.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun. 24 hours.
Oh, no, we didn't do 24 hours.
No, but DJ did.
We did a cushy hour right in the middle of the afternoon where it didn't inconvenience anybody. But yeah, DJ's a beast. He live streamed on a conversation about home theater for 24 hours, starting Saturday morning, going to Sunday morning. So
yeah, he's the Jerry Lewis of home theater.
Well, I don't think this was quite for charity. He did say the original idea was to do the 24-hour live stream for charity, but they couldn't quite figure out the financials or whatever. So he was just like, to heck with it, man. I'm just going to do a live stream for 24 hours. So maybe eventually it'll turn into a charity thing, but it was a lot of fun. And DJ, if you're listening to this, thanks for having us on, man.
Yeah, thanks, man. That was fun. As always. It's always fun to be on his podcast or his what do you call it? A YouTube cast? Video cast? Video channel? YouTube channel? His YouTube channel.
A live stream?
Live stream, whatever. Yeah, something. It was fun to be on that. Anyway, it's always fun. He has me on every, year, 6 months, something, just talking about movies and stuff like that. So
it was a really fun conversation, but we've got our own really fun conversation to talk about today.
Yeah.
What are we going to talk about, man?
Well, we are going to, I got to check the running order here on the legendary Audio
Unleashed
podcast idea board that's on Google Docs, which is not open to the public because then people would put all their own pet ideas in there and we might confuse them with ours. And, we'd be like, a deep dive into inner detail.
Do you want to start off with the Taylor Swift thing?
Yeah, let's start with the Taylor Swift thing. This was just baffling to me. It still is baffling to me. Maybe you can shed some light, but you put this on the board and I'm like, and you started off with, okay, hear me out. Because as soon as you were going to say Taylor Swift, I'm like, no. And nothing against Taylor Swift, but I don't care about Taylor Swift.
I think some of her stuff is perfectly fine for what it is.
Haters gonna hate. And there's something, la, 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 la.
Hey, that's actually on the album that we're discussing today.
And there's the other one, I will never, ever, ever get back together. Something. That's the two Taylor Swift songs I'm familiar with.
Man, I think you've got a career ahead of you doing. I think you've got a career ahead of you doing Taylor Swift covers.
Has she had some other hits besides that?
Yeah, she's had quite a few, but I can't remember. I think she has a new hit. Like, I think with the release of the new version, the re-recorded version of 1989, I think she literally filled the top 10. She's got hits galore. But anyway, we're not going to be talking about her music. We're going to be talking about an interesting recording quirk of the new version, the re-recorded version of 1989 that I probably wouldn't have heard if some younger listeners hadn't picked up on it. I can kind of barely hear it, but we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about, interestingly, what her fans are doing about it.
Yeah, I'm really curious to find out more about this because I was shocked that I shouldn't have been shocked. I was a little shocked still that such an artifact could occur in a modern recording. And number two, that nobody caught it, although I understand, I think, the reasons why nobody caught it. And I'm kind of thrilled because we keep hearing about how, everyone has hearing damage now, except if you could hear this, your hearing's pretty good.
Yeah. So what are we going to talk about after that, man?
Isn't it your turn to? No, wait, it's my turn now because I screwed up the Taylor Swift thing.
You didn't screw it up. You're just improvising.
We're going to talk about a guy that we both really admire and like, and that everybody should go watch his videos. His name is Jim Lill, Lill, and he is a guitarist in Nashville. He's a actual musical performer, and that's his main gig. But for some reason, he decided to start this YouTube channel. Now, he doesn't have like a ton of videos up, but every one of them is a masterwork. And the one that I stumbled upon, which apparently you knew about this guy, I didn't. I stumbled upon it because I'm working on some microphone tests for Wirecutter, some USB microphone tests. And I've done very little microphone testing in my life, although I've seen other people do it, so I kind of understand how to do it from a legitimate technical standpoint, not just like standing in front of a microphone and going, I had the time of my life, and then see what it sounds like, right? Because that's the way most people test microphones, right? Or they get some singer to do it, and they see what they think of the sound on whatever monitors or headphones they're listening to it on, which also affect the sound. And I think there's probably as much BS in the pro audio world and in the musical instrument world as there is in consumer audio, which is to say there's a lot of BS, a lot of really unsubstantiated statements by manufacturers and in their marketing materials, and a lot of really lazy agreement with those kind of statements by people who are supposed to be reviewing this stuff. But what he does, the video I found is, where does the tone come from in a microphone? And he did like a 6-month effort to find out, because, there's so much mystique about vintage microphones and all this kind of stuff. And there's so many assumptions, like this microphone's better than that one. And, oh, you've got to use this microphone for this. And the more you're exposed to it, just as with a lot of high-end audio, the more you just start to have to realize, like, this doesn't make any sense, right? And so he does a deep dive, like testing all kinds of different microphones, taking the microphones apart, figuring out like which parts of the microphone affect the sound. And we'll dig a little bit more into that. And then what are we going to do after that?
So there's a very interesting product release. JLab, is that how you would say it?
JLab,
yeah. JLab headphone company has just released the first pair of earphones that follow the Knowles curve. What's the exact name of this thing? The Knowles preference something, blah, what do they call it? The Knowles preferred listening response curve.
Yeah.
Which I think would be safe to say is sort of an evolution of the Harman target curve.
It's an evolution of the Harman target curve. It is not a rejection of it.
We'll get evolution.
Into that.
Yeah, we'll get into that in the discussion, but we now have a product that actually follows that curve. So it's going to be, now you've done a lot of writing about this. You've done a lot of writing about target curves in general.
Fantastic. Yeah.
You were one of the first people that I heard about this Knowles curve from you. So I think this is going to be a really good education for me. And I'd like to hear what you think about this, why it matters. And I have an interesting question for you that I'll save for the discussion, but I think we'll get there. We'll get there. But what are we going to do for Patreons this week? Or what are we going to do for patrons this week?
For our patrons, our Patreon subscribers, Rhino Records, or whatever you call it, has recently released its second round of Quadio releases, where they go back and they find original quad releases from like the 70s or whatever, and they're re-releasing them in quad the same way, I guess pretty much the same as you would get them if you had bought them on a quad album in 1975, or a quad 8-track, because they had quad 8-tracks in the mid 1970s. Is that all the quad formats they had? Yeah, 8-track and record, I guess. We are going to talk about this and talk about where we think this might go and what kind of prospect we think this has.
Yeah.
I have some insight, having worked at Having been the marketing director for Dolby Laboratories for a couple of years, I have a little bit of extra insight into all this stuff and surround sound formats and the commercial viability of them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So shall we start?
Let's talk about Tay-Tay, man.
That's Taylor Swift for people like me who are old and aren't and never bought into this whole name of things like Beyonce has, what do they call her?
Queen Bee.
Queen Bee. And they didn't call, we didn't call Richie Blackmore anything, did we, except for Richie Blackmore? Did we call Elton John anything except for Elton John?
We called Elvis the King, though.
True, and we called Miles Davis the Prince of Darkness.
Yeah.
But he's probably the only jazz guy that has a nickname like that, I think. But it's Miles, so it's a whole different level of jazz guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, enough about nicknames.
Yeah.
So what happened with this Taylor Swift? What is the deal with this Taylor Swift thing? You are the expert on the Taylor Swift thing.
I'm not the expert on the Taylor Swift thing, but I've got a little bit of background.
Okay.
So over the past few years, Taylor Swift has been re-recording her first 6 albums. Mm-hmm. And the reason she's been re-recording her first 6 albums is because a troll who is friends with Kanye West and apparently hates Taylor Swift bought her old record label.
This is Scooter Braun, right?
Scooter Braun, yeah.
See, I know a couple things.
He was extorting her with the masters for her first 6 albums.
Yeah.
And basically getting really draconian with it, like wouldn't allow her to use clips from music from her first 6 albums in a documentary that she was doing. So anyway, she's re-recording them. And this month, or last month, late October, the Taylor's version of one of her most famous albums, 1989, was released. And it came out, it hit the charts, it made big news. Everybody's listening to it. I kind of thought that was going to be the end of it. But I was scrolling through Reddit one day, and I started to see some interesting posts about people were calling them ground loop hums in 1989 TV, which is Taylor's version. And I'm like, what's going on here? And the deeper that I dug into it, the more interested that I got in it. So it started off with people saying there's this really high-pitched like hum or whine or noise in her vocals. And some people were saying, you're on crack. What are you talking about? I can't hear it. And at one point, one of her fans actually just sort of downloaded Audacity and downloaded some spectrum analyzers and started looking at it and going, anytime her vocal track kicks in, there is this consistent hum at around 15 kilohertz, right? Mm-hmm. And somebody else came in and said, oh, that happens a lot with music when there is a CRT monitor in the room. It happens a lot. And it's actually 15.7 kilohertz and, whatever. And so Lauren Dragon, who's the headphone specialist for Wirecutter, and I were talking back and forth about this. And she found another Reddit thread who found that this is on all of Hans Zimmer. Yeah. So apparently all of Hans Zimmer's records have this artifact in it because he uses CRT monitors when he is recording because there's no latency, right? So anyway, right. I don't know, but if you look at photographs or videos of Hans Zimmer directing, an orchestra, he's always looking at a CRT, right?
How about that?
Yeah, it's totally weird. And I found Reddit threads where a lot of people going, yep, it's in this song, it's in this song, it's in this album. And so anyway, I bought Taylor's new album just because I wanted to explore deeper. And I started doing some analysis on it, some spectral analysis. And it turns out it's actually not at 15.7 kilohertz.
What is it?
It's at 15.46 kilohertz, which... I don't know what that would be. Where's that coming from? Right. But we should point out here that at least a lot of people, perhaps even the majority of people, can't hear 15.75 or whatever this is. I can't hear it. 15.47. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't hear it. I remember I used to be able to hear it because I worked at Video Magazine back in the days of, NTSC CRT sets, and they had a 15.75 kilohertz flyback frequency, as we noted. And, I could hear it, and my colleague, Lance Braithwaite, couldn't, because Lance is like 20 years older than me. And so, I remember one time there was a seriously malfunctioning monitor that he was using that was just whining like crazy. And I'm like, what is going on? What are you doing? He's like, what? And he's sitting there with his cigarette while he's typing, the smoke-filled room with all this lab gear all over the place. And I'm like, you can't hear that whine? He's like, no. I'm kind of like, and I was like, I unplugged the monitor. I'm like, dude, I gotta get you another monitor. And but it didn't bother him, it bothered me. But anyway, so that's a really high frequency. So for a lot of listeners, that may not be a problem. And here, may I venture a guess?
Sure.
Okay, Taylor Swift's been in the music industry for a long time. Was she born in 1989?
Yes, that's where the name of the album comes from.
I think that she's been in the music industry long enough, and even if she's consistently used hearing protection, which she must have, at least for a lot of that time, because otherwise she'd be stone cold deaf. You're playing all those concerts, you're in studios all the time, you're constantly exposed to loud stuff. So I'm going to guess that Taylor Swift probably can't hear 15 point whatever kilohertz it is. And then at the same time, her producers, people like Jack Antonoff. See, I knew the name of one of her producers. Aren't you impressed?
I am impressed.
Same thing. I just happened to read an article about him in Slate this morning about how much he sucks. So it's not my opinion, although it's probably an opinion I would share had I listened to any of his music. But anyway, so those guys are all, probably their ears are pretty blasted out as well. So none of them could hear it, but then people whose ears aren't all blasted out, like probably most of Taylor Swift's fans, can hear it, and it's troubling.
I could only hear it on one song. I could hear it on Clean, and that was the song that Lauren could hear it on as well. And we were talking back and forth about, like, what does it sound like to us? And to us, it just sounds like there's like an icy edge to her vocals. This only comes in when she's singing, and as soon as she stops singing, it goes away. Right. So it's something that was on her vocal mic, and we don't register it as this noise in the background. We register it as an additive quality on top of her voice. But a lot of her younger fans are describing it as just like a piercing noise that is a constant distraction, like throughout the entire album, and even on a couple of her acoustic guitar tracks. But what's interesting for me is it has led to a larger discussion amongst her fans, or at least, the fans of hers that are on Reddit, about hearing health and about audio production. And a lot of them seem to be surprised to learn that as you age, you lose high frequency hearing acuity. They were like, what? And also, that loss is in a large part dependent on how well you protect your ears. So this is starting a conversation about hearing health. It's also, fascinatingly enough, starting a very, very cool discussion about audio production, because a lot of her fans are trying to fix this with EQ, and they're doing the best they can, and they're circulating bootleg re-releases, remasters of 1984 Taylor's version. Right. But then there are other people coming in going, but guys, that's not really going to solve the problem, because it's only on her vocal tracks. So we need them to go back to the original mix and fix it in the mix, not the master. And people are like, what's the difference? And they're getting an explanation of that. So, I originally started this whole thing is just, I thought it would be interesting to talk about this anomaly, this artifact in the recording. But in the end of it, as I've been writing a story about this, which I'm going to be writing for Soundstage, I'm realizing this is a conversation starter. People are learning about hearing health. They're learning about audio production. They're learning about the difference between mixing and mastering, all because of this weird thing. And I think that's really, really cool. I also think it's really cool that they're recirculating remasters, and they're going, are they going to fix this in the stream? Well, they can't fix it on the CD. Can they fix the vinyl? Is it even in the vinyl? And people are listening to the vinyl, and the people who have the vinyl are apparently too old to hear it anyway.
It's not in the vinyl.
So
it's not in the vinyl. You have to, because as Bernie Grundman himself told me, he said, by the time you get to the inside of a record, you can't run anything over about 15 kilohertz anyway.
Wow. Yeah.
So much for vinyl's, infinite frequency response. But Bernie Grundman, what's he know? He's an upstart.
I have to throw in a plug here. We had Bernie Grundman on the Soundstage Audiophile podcast a few months back. Jordan, the host for season 2, actually did an interview with him about what the heck is mastering and how does it work and what do you do and what's the difference between digital and analog. And it was a really, really fun conversation. So I'll link to that in the doobly-doo.
So, but what do you think the source of this thing is, since it's not 15.75 kilohertz, it's 15.46 kilohertz?
I'm looking at the spectral analysis again, and what's funny is I completely missed this, and this has largely been ignored in the conversation, but identical to that hum at 15, what did I say the frequency was? 15.46, identical to that, lining up with it perfectly. There is another noise at 18.5 and at 18.6.
I'm sensing a mechanical noise.
It looks like resonance.
Well,
it looks like some kind of resonance.
Okay, here's the thing. 15.75, unless it's really loud, isn't going to penetrate a wall. And she recorded this in her apartment, right?
I think so.
Which, granted, a Taylor Swift apartment, even in New York City, is humongous. So, God knows what her facility, she's not recording it on like a little Tascam or anything with her guitar on the couch, probably. She probably got a full-on studio set up there. And probably got somebody working it for her, right?
Yeah.
So, certainly she does. So, my guess is there's probably something like since it can't penetrate walls, unless it's, like I said, really loud, the wall's going to filter almost all of it out, right? So, it's got to be coming from in the room. I'm going to guess it's some kind of a thing off of the heating system or something like that. It could be a little, you got fans in there, you got mechanical things that might have a little whine or something in there. Although 15 kilohertz is pretty, it could happen. I really feel like it's some kind of little mechanical thing, or it could have been some other electronic. It could have, maybe she had a wireless speaker or something there that was just whining. Who knows? There's all sorts of reasons you could get a little whine like that. But, now I think for my next album, I think I'm going to put a high frequency tone on there. And so that people can then remaster it and pass the remasters around, and it'll get on Reddit. And then I will become as big as Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
This is my marketing plan. It's probably as good as any marketing plan in the music industry at this point.
Yeah.
For jazz, for sure.
Oh, get on the radio. I think that's pretty much the plan.
I already did that.
I know. But so
I got on the radio. We got nothing. We got no streams. We got lots of radio play, but no streams.
I can't help you with that then, buddy.
And no revenue. So not that we were expecting any, but still. Hey, you want to move on to our next topic?
Let's do it, man. Let's take a break and get some water and come back. And what are we talking about next?
We're going to talk about Jim Lill and his awesome videos.
Heck yeah. All right. See you in a minute. And welcome back. I'm Dennis.
And I'm Brent. And this is Audio
Unleashed,
the podcast that tells you what's on our minds this week or this 2 weeks, this by month, semi-month, whatever, something at the moment. but it's always audio related. And we are going to talk about something audio related now, although it's a little outside the realm of what we normally do, because this is a lot more it's much more musical instrument oriented. But
we're expanding our horizons, man.
We are.
This is still audio. We can do it.
But it pertains directly to what we do. And it's talking about someone who does something that's tangential to what we do, but who does one hell of an amazing job.
Yeah. Yeah. So how'd you come across this video, Bubba?
Well, I've been working on tests of USB microphones for Wirecutter, and I was kind of poking around on YouTube, kind of looking at like for people's reviews of some of these things to kind of see what people are saying, because I'm just curious, because our findings did not square with what I expected. I'll just put it to you that way. And I found this guy's video, tested. Where does the tone come from in a microphone? And he's holding up a like soda can that he turned into a microphone. And I'm like, what the hell is with this guy? And so this is a half an hour video. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'll check it out. I'll just see. I think I was at a dull moment. I just finished a big writing project and needed a break anyway. So I watched this video, and this is one of the best videos I've ever seen in my entire life. And the guy's name is Jim Lill. It's Lill. And he is a musician in Nashville. He's a guitar player. I guess he tours with people and does all that stuff. He's a country player, but he wanted to find out, where does the tone come from in a microphone? Because you have vintage microphones that are really revered, and some of these things, vintage mics, can cost you $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and then you have really just expensive mics that are $3,000, $4,000, something like that. But then again, you can go buy nowadays, with all the Chinese manufacturing and everything, you can go buy a large diaphragm condenser microphone for $100 easy, maybe even a little bit less. Whereas when I was kind of coming up doing this stuff, the cheapest decent large diaphragm condenser you could buy was a Rode NT1, and it was $600 or $700. And now they're so cheap. It's like, wait a minute. Well, what's the difference? I mean, physically, the MXL 990 microphone that I have, it's $100. Is not really physically any different from a $3,000 or $4,000 Neumann microphone, which is the sort of standard for a lot of like super high-end recording mics. And so he kind of looked at that and went like, most people would look at it and go, well, Neumann's better because it's more expensive and it's more revered, so therefore must be better. But he looked, and this is the same attitude that most audio journalists do in consumer audio. It's like, oh, well, Wilson Audio is revered and they're expensive, so they must be better, right? But this guy took just a much, much, much more laborious and costly, but far more useful approach to looking at microphones. And he didn't just, I was so impressed when he started out by the same, he started out coming from the same place I did when I started testing mics for Wirecutter, is that you can't, if you're going to test a microphone by performing or speaking or something, well, every performance is going to be different, right? Like you can't say the same thing. Even voice professionals can't get it perfect. And so I bought myself a mouth simulator, which is a doohickey that's about the size of a grapefruit that simulates the acoustics of a human mouth. So I could play a recording of voice through it, EQ'd to compensate for the changes in the simulator. And it sounds like a real human speaking, right? So he came with his solution to test all these microphones, and he's doing it much more from like a guitar standpoint than anything else. His solution was to find a coaxial speaker with a tweeter in the middle and with a woofer surrounding it, because he was smart enough to figure out the positioning is really critical, because if you have a two-way speaker you're playing the music from, if you're closer to the tweeter than the woofer, you're going to get phase differences between them. It's going to change the sound, right? So he was smart enough, which was already, he's smarter than most audio writers. And he doesn't even do this. As he keeps saying, I'm just a performer. I don't know anything about this stuff, but he clearly figured out enough to get that right. Most audio writers wouldn't. So he built this speaker. And he actually even built a framework with fishing lines so he could align every microphone perfectly in front of this speaker. Yeah. And so he tests like a zillion microphones and, runs frequency response sweeps and also lets you hear how they sound. And
I wanted to interject real quick if I might, because that to me was one of the most impressive things about the video. I mean, I think a lot of people who do this stuff don't acknowledge the fact or forget that our auditory memory is exceedingly short.
Yeah.
So the clips that he's playing where you can hear this mic versus this mic, I mean, it's like, jin, 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 jin. Yeah. I mean, it's that close and that short, and you can really hear the difference between these things. So he takes a Shure SM57 and he says, this is neutral. We're calling this neutral.
Yeah,
We're
and
saying
I love the fact that he did that.
Yeah, this is our target response, if you will, right? And everything else is going to be EQ'd to where we're assuming the frequency response of the Shure SM57 is flat. That was huge. But to hear the comparisons between them so directly, so quickly, was to me just like, I'm sitting there going, dang, I knew this dude was brilliant, but that is next level brilliant. Yeah.
Well, plus the fact that he used an SM57, which is a super ultra standard mic that's been around for many decades. Mm-hmm. The fact that he used that as his reference, I would have reflexively used one of my measurement microphones, which are flat. Most measurement mics are down like 1 decibel at 20 kilohertz, and they're really flat off axis. He used a non-flat microphone, but it is a microphone that everybody in the recording industry owns multiple copies of. Mm-hmm. And so it's a great reference. It's interesting though, because as he was doing this, I was thinking about Floyd Toole. Because Floyd talks, Floyd being the famous guy who does the, decades of research in Canada and at Harman, and has his famous book, Sound Reproduction, The Acoustics and Psychoacoustics of Loudspeakers in Rooms.
We'll have a link in the doobly-doo.
Yeah. Floyd has told me multiple times he's interested in 5 decibel and 10 decibel differences, not 1 decibel differences. Because 5 decibel and 10 decibel differences are difference that are readily heard. 1 decibel differences you might not even hear, and whether or not you like the 1 decibel boost at some frequency or not is questionable. Whereas if you have a 5 or 10 decibel boost above 4 kilohertz, that's not going to sound good unless you're a really old audio writer.
Yeah.
who's high frequency hearing is shot. True story, but whatever. I don't want to get into that right now. But and Jim Lill is the same way. But by showing you these really quick clips, and it's like, right? He's focusing on big differences, not little tiny subtle differences, right? Mm-hmm. So oh God, I mean, I can't even remember all the stuff he did. He went through so many steps. It's just mind blowing. Eventually, accumulating in taking him all to a big studio where actually some of his favorite records were made in Nashville, and going through their entire mic collection the same way. And let's just say he didn't merely compare mics like with tube mics. He goes through assumptions. He goes through all of the, I've always been told that X. I've always been told that Y. I've always been told that Z. And so, I've always been told that tube mics sound like this and solid state sound like this. Well, he's got a mic where you can select tube or solid state, compares them directly. Well, I've always been told that the good American tubes are better than the cheap tubes. So he swaps between the good American tubes and the cheap tubes, compares them directly. So he tests so many assumptions that I think you and I could have watched this 29-minute video 5 times before we recorded, and we would have forgotten 90% of the testing that he did because it's so exhaustive. So one of the really useful things though, is, he comes down to the conclusion that most of the sound of the microphone is in the element, which is the part that actually picks up sound. Not all the parts that surround the microphone, not the preamp and everything that may or may not be in the microphone. It is in a condenser mic. It's not in a dynamic mic. But do you know what I have right in front of me here, Dennis?
What do you have?
I have a microphone element, which I bought, which just arrived literally like right before we started the podcast from micparts.com, because he built a microphone out of a soda pop can and one of these elements and which these are about $100, and one of these elements and a piece of screen off of like a window screen, and compared it to a $3,000 microphone, and it's really, really close. So he actually talks at this point. There's a guy in Nashville he knows who repairs microphones, and that guy was able to make him different kinds of elements and diaphragms and things like that, to experiment with, like, okay, does the diaphragm sound better if it's thin or thick? And, the spacing of the diaphragm off of its frame, how much difference does that make, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he kind of came to the conclusion that, like, you can get a really good element, which presumably this is. I mean, the one I have in my hand is the same one he's got in his photo. And he says, you can put that into like a standard mic. I mean, he used, I think it was the electronics from an MXL mic in his PopCam mic. And he said, you can put the sort of generic mic body around the really a good element, and you can get a sound that is very similar to that of a vintage microphone. So I thought, well, I have this MXL 990 kicking around, which is too bright. And I bought it just because, a friend of mine was using it. I thought, well, I'll buy one too. And it was so cheap. It was, so I'm putting this element in it and I'm going to see what it does. So I'm thinking it might be, cool. I really don't have a large diaphragm condenser mic that I really like right now. I still have my Rode one from 25 years ago, almost 30 years ago. And it's fine, but it doesn't have that sort of magical sound that the really great mics have. And I'm thinking, like, well, maybe this is my path to that. And with a $100 microphone upgraded with a $100 capsule, I have a $200 investment. And according to what he's saying, that should give me sound quality that is comparable to a good vintage mic.
Who knew? Apparently, it's the transducer that makes the difference.
Yeah, which granted shouldn't have surprised us, but I was just so thrilled by this, and it just made me mad, though, in a lot of ways. It made me mad that, like, we don't really have the same thing in consumer audio and in high end audio. And I think if you did, although I don't think they'd be as open to it, because what if you did this with digital to analog converters, right? Well, for the purposes of these demos, they'd all sound the same, and then people would just say, "Oh, well, your demo just doesn't capture the sonic nuances of blah, blah, whatever."
Right.
And the same with speakers. I mean, you could, speakers obviously sound different, but you could start to dig into, like, what really makes a difference in a speaker. And some of this we already know. I mean, if you look at the Loudspeaker Design Cookbook by Vance Dickinson, link in the show notes, he goes into great depth about what makes a difference in a speaker. Does the cabinet make a difference? What difference does the driver make? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Vance is kind of the same sort of guy as Jim Lill. It's like, he's like, rather than saying, "Oh, well, I kind of noticed casually that, the cabinet of the speaker makes a difference, so the cabinet makes a big difference." I mean, that's as much research as most high-end audio manufacturers put into stuff. I shouldn't say most, a lot. And so, but Vance in the book digs into it and runs a bunch of measurements and tests, and sometimes listening tests, to see, well, how much do these things really affect the sound? It's the same sort of thing. It's just that, Vance's approach is radically more technical than Jim Lill's, which is marginally technical at all.
Did you watch any of his other videos? I have to say his favorite of mine, and one that I had actually put in the idea board for our when we were doing the Soundstage podcast, was he did a similar video about where the tone in an electric guitar comes from.
Which was also mind-blowing.
God, in the end, I mean, just to not to spoil this too much for people I'll put the link to this. You should go watch it. But he built basically a guitar out of two work tables that were bolted to the floor. And one of the tables, he made basically the bridge and sort of a holder for the pickup. And the other table, he made the headstock with a nut. And in between was nothing, air. And it turned out, all of this discussion about, tone woods, alder, maple, all of this, none of that matters. None of it matters at all. And what matters in terms of tone of the guitar is the pickup, the placement of the pickup, the distance from the pickup to the strings, the angle of the pickup, all of these things. He really gets to the root of what makes one. Oh, scale length was another thing that mattered. Yeah. But the body wood, well, there was no body wood in one guitar and there was in the other, and it made no difference. So that was when I really, really fell in love with this dude's videos.
Yeah, and then he did one. He built it out of he built one out of like a 2x4 that was laying around in his barn, right?
Yeah,
and
that's what Les Paul did in the beginning.
Yeah, it sounded to me. It sounded slightly different than whatever fancy guitar he had, but it was real close. And it wasn't like one was better than the other. They were just a little bit different. Yeah. But then you still see. I just saw yesterday. I got a press release because I get a million press releases from all sorts of people about some guitar manufacturer, and they had some master luthier, blah, blah, somebody talking about a solid body guitar they were building. And he was talking about the tone woods and how critical it is to have the right tone woods. It's like, dude, it's just not.
Yeah.
So everybody should go watch some of this guy's videos because also he's really entertaining on camera. And by the way, he took like 6 months to do this microphone video. But given how much time it takes for him to do this, because like he does one on guitar cabinets, guitar speakers, and he goes and builds like a whole ton of cabinets. Right. And I have to say, I did that once for Sound and Vision because I wanted to do one big subwoofer versus two medium-sized subwoofers versus 4 small ones. So I had to build 4, 5, 6, 7 cabinets and load them with some drivers from Dayton Audio. And Sound and Vision fortunately paid my expenses on that, which I don't know who would do that nowadays.
Nice.
But it was a really good article, and it's still up. If I still had a website, it would still be up on there. But you can probably find it on Sound and Vision. But I did blind tests with a bunch of listeners and said, here's 3 different subwoofer setups. What do you like better? I didn't tell them anything, and I got really useful results. And I found out that one 15-inch subwoofer, if you don't care what anybody else thinks about the sound in the room other than you, and you can optimize the sound for your position, one 15-inch subwoofer is an awesome choice. It's better than multiple subs because you don't care what the sound's like for the rest of the family. It's just, I don't know. I just thought this guy was great. I hope he does more videos. I hope he does not come into the consumer audio world because I don't need competition.
Yeah, he's great. And we'll link to both of the videos that we mentioned in the show notes. But for now, I need to get a drink of water, buddy. What about you?
I don't, but I'll be waiting for you when you get back.
All right, we'll be back in a minute.
This is Audio
Unleashed.
And we, in our third segment, are going to be talking about a new set of true wireless earphones called the Epic Lab Edition from JLab, which is not a manufacturer that's well known to audio enthusiasts, I think. They're kind of really mass market. But I think this might make them more well known to audio enthusiasts because they are the very first true wireless earphones that are at least marketed as using the Knowles, what I call the Knowles curve, but it's actually, what is it again? The Knowles?
It is called the Knowles Preferred Listening Response Curve.
Yeah. So this is a new target curve that's just come out in the last, let's just say 2 years. It might have been a year and a half, something like that. where they are extending so there's a popular curve called the Harman curve, right? That was developed through years of research at Harman, parent company of JBL, AKG, et cetera, and Harman was there had been other headphone target curves in the past, and yet no one, as Sean Olive from Harman puts it, no one was using them, so there must have been something wrong with them. So they did a bunch of research. What?
Can we sort of take a 30,000-foot view of what these target curves are? Because I think there's some misunderstanding about that. I mean, when you look at the Harman target curve, it's very curvy. And I think most people would look at that and go, wow, it's a lot of bass and a lot of mid-range, and there's dips and everything. Yeah. But all of that is to account for, ear anatomy and things like that. And so this weird looking funky curve is an attempt to describe neutrality. This, once you get these things on or in your ears, it doesn't sound like this, big roller coaster of a target frequency response curve. It sounds generally flat. So I don't know. A lot of people misunderstand that for some reason. So I just wanted to point it out.
Yeah. And these are all measured on ear simulators, which are, a little cylinder that has 2 resonating chambers in it, if I remember correctly, that replicate the acoustics of the average human ear. And so that adds its own thing to it. So a good sounding headphone will not look flat on the measurement. So anyway, Harman came up with their own curve, I want to say probably 8 years ago. And it has slowly been embraced by a lot of people. The problem with the Harman curve is when all the Harman curve research was done, all of the headphone measurement gear that was out there had actually been developed for measuring hearing aids. And so none of it worked above 8 kilohertz. And that's for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're talking about speech, we don't care about anything above 8 kilohertz. Number two, the acoustics of the human ears don't vary that much for low frequencies, but for high frequencies, the varying shape of the ear canal has a giant effect on the ears. So you can't really model the human ear above 10 kilohertz or something because everyone's are so different. However, the original headphone measurement gear that was developed decades ago had a big resonance at about 13.7, I think, kilohertz. I can't remember exactly. And the resonance changes depending on what you have fitted into it. But it had a big resonance that's basically the resonance from the microphone, which represents your eardrum, up to the top of the device under test, the earphones or headphones, right? And sound bouncing back and forth there was a resonance at 13 point something kilohertz. So in, I guess, about probably 6 or 7 years ago, most of the major headphone manufacturers found ways to damp that resonance. It doesn't get rid of it, but it gives you you can get a measurement above 8 kilohertz that is, somewhat representative of what's going on there. That doesn't have this big giant spike in there, right?
Yeah.
So Now Knowles makes balanced armatures, which are little tiny drivers that were originally developed for hearing aids because they're really, really small and they can fit entirely within your ear. But they've also become popular for audiophile earphones. So Knowles they are the leading manufacturer of these things. And balanced armatures are better known for high frequency reproduction than for low frequency reproduction. And so Knowles thought very reasonably we have measurement gear now that goes above that. What, should we have a preference curve that extends past Harman curve? Because they're Harman curve works fine, but what if we go past that? Can we do some listening tests and things to find out how people react to different responses above that? And that's where they started to get into, hearing capability issues, because when people lose their hearing, they tend to lose it above, 8 or 10 kilohertz, right? So long story short, they came up with a curve that involves the thing that they found that sounded best to average listeners is a pretty big boost. If I remember correctly, it's centered at about 16 kilohertz. And it's a big boost. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's I think it varies. I'm going to look up my own article on this, which is a pretty good article.
I think if you do say so yourself.
I did an extensive article on Knowles curve because I tested for Audio Express magazine, which is a super, super technical publication. I tested the Knowles Franklin 2 developer kit, which is like their own set of sort of demo earphones, and they have a true wireless reference design called the KN2 that I also tested, which is a design that you can just go buy it and put your name on it and sell it as yours, or you can have a manufacturer, replicate it. And so the Knowles curve, I'm looking it up on my article right now, and we'll have links to all this stuff in the show notes. They are, and I should point out, this was done by the Knowles team of Thomas Miller and Christina Downey, and they published their paper. It was about a year ago last year that they finally published their paper. I had been talking to them about this for, I think a year before they published the paper. But they recommend a boost, like I was saying, 16 kilohertz. And relative to the response of the headphones at 1K, the boost increases 3 dB for every 10 years of age over age 30. Okay. So for me, that means that's just a rough estimate. But for someone in my age group, which is 56 to 65, the recommended boost is plus 12 to plus 27 dB. Okay. So this is convenient for Knowles because dynamic drivers are really not very sensitive in the top octave of treble. So, but balanced armatures are. So to really hit that level of boost, you need to have balanced armatures. And of course, with balanced armatures, you can put multiple ones in there. And they have a little tube it's a little teeny tiny thing. And they have a little tube at the end that you can combine 4 of them or whatever number you want, whatever will fit in the earphones. Together,
I think my Ultimate ears have 5.
You can put a ton. There's some that have 9 or 10 drivers per channel, and so you can do a bunch of these things to hit your whatever SPL you want, and so you kind of need balanced armatures to make Knowles curve, which is convenient for Knowles. There have been some other. Okay, I should say first of all, I did an article about this right when they first. But even before this Audio Express article, I did one for Soundstage where they told me about this. And I said, well, I'm going to test that by just replicating it and just doing what they said and putting this boost in and seeing what it sounds like to me. And I tried it and I was kind of like, I can't hear 16 kilohertz, but you can, the boost, there's a lot of boost that occurs, outside that range, right? So when you're boosting 16 kilohertz, you're also boosting 12 kilohertz, but not as much, right? So I tried it. I'm kind of like, wow, I don't hear this as screamingly bright. I just hear more, so-called air and detail. And, without it really changing the sound of the music dramatically, in a way that bothered me. It didn't sound like a coloration. It just sounded like a little extra life to the music. And I was kind of like, well, this seems to kind of work. And then I did it as well with a reference design test. And well, this seems to work. I haven't heard a lot of people talking about this because to talk about it, there have been a few other models out that were similar to Knowles curve, the Soundcore Liberty 3 Pro and the Edifier Neo Buds Pro, if I remember correctly. Those are similar to Knowles curve. This one supposedly is right on Knowles curve. And, maybe now that this is coming out, people will try it and you'll get some commentary about whether or not Knowles curve is good. The downside is this is a $200 pair of earphones. And JLab says it's their best sounding earbuds ever. Well, this is the best sounding podcast ever.
Yes.
So both of those statements have equal credibility.
Let me ask you an ignorant question.
Okay.
So they've got these different age groups, and they recommend a different boost at 16 kilohertz for these different age groups.
Yeah.
Which the target curve, which age group does it match?
Well, that's a good question. And I don't know. And I'd like to know the answer to that question.
Okay.
Of course, with all true wireless I shouldn't say all, with all, these are $200. So, and they have noise canceling, all the sort of high end features. It's a dual driver. It's got a dynamic driver and a balanced armature. So it's a high end, relatively high end product. So it's going to have an app. I mean, most of these things have an app nowadays. So I'm assuming that within the app they allow you to try some different curves, right? Can
you maybe set your age?
Maybe you set your age, or maybe you do it manually, or maybe you follow the instructions in or something. I don't know. I haven't seen the product yet. But I would have, since it's so easy to do that, there's no reason you couldn't have an adjustment within the app that lets you adjust it. And, maybe it's preset to 6 or 8 dB boost, depending on their target market, JLab has been around for a while. I'm sure they have pretty good demographics on who they expect to sell these things to. The downside is they're not going to, I just feel like this is going to be ignored by most of the people that could do a serious evaluation of it. Like, well, I don't do that anymore, but like Critical, famous headphone or famous earphone reviewer and consultant. I'd like to see what his point. I mean, he's got his own target curve, as well.
I'm pretty sure my dad has his own target curve.
Everybody's got their own target curve, and I just have to say, there were some guys. I'm not even going to say who it was, but I don't want to criticize people too much unless they just say something really stupid. But there are some guys in the headphone industry, who are, journalists or something, and they have their own target curve now. And they were like, well, we read your article about target curves and, we think, our target curve, blah, 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 blah. And they give you a rationale for why their target curve is better, not based on listening tests, but based on their own, intellectual rationale. Right. So, and they're like, well, we'd like to have you on our video cast or whatever, our YouTube channel to discuss this. I said, I'm happy to go on, but, I got to warn you that, I've been doing this a long time. And, if you don't have, I hear a lot of intellectual rationale for a lot of things in audio. And my attitude is, if you don't have listening tests to back it up, it's not worth anything. And I said, but, and they're like, okay, well, we're going to have, okay, look, we'll get back to you. Still waiting. It's been about a year.
We'll take that under advisement.
Yeah. So I think they wisely decided not to have me on. But, their curve's probably fine and some people would probably like it. But that's not look, my view of a target curve is not like, oh, this is the curve that people will like. Right. It's like, if you get on Harman curve or something, chances are you'll probably like it, right? And their research shows that's what most people like. But it doesn't mean you will like it, and you may want something a little different. And in fact, there are 3 variants of the Harman curve to deal with different tastes. Right. And,
if my understanding is that target curve was descriptive, not prescriptive. It was listen to a crap ton of headphones. Which ones do people like? Which ones do they not like? How can we describe the sound of the ones that they do like?
Exactly.
As opposed to the ones that they don't like. It's not like Dr. Sean Olive sat and drew a curve on a piece of paper and said, this is what headphones shall sound like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I should point out, it just so happened that the curve they came up with is basically what a good set of speakers sounds like in a good room. So I guess you could say it's prescriptive in that way, but it's not really. It's not. It's basically saying, here's what people like. And I think a lot of people have the idea that these target curves are like some dude sitting there deciding what people should like and then saying, this is what you should like, which is, that may be the case with some target curves, but it's not the case in Harman curve or Knowles curve.
Oh, buddy, I think that is as good a place as any to say goodbye to most of our listeners. We still have one more segment for our Patreon subscribers, our patrons. Yeah. So, but before we get to that, do you want to do some credits?
I would like to do some credits. So, may I say, and let's see if I can get this right. This is a Butterburger production.
Yeah, man.
There you
Absolutely.
go.
I did all of the engineering back end on this one, and you're going to be doing the mixing and mastering and editing because it's your turn. I don't envy you that one. Yeah. You had mentioned
it's easy.
You had mentioned you're going to dig into the archives for the music this time around. Do you have any thoughts on what you're going to do for music?
I might throw something in there that I'm kind of messing around with. That's experimental. That is going to end up being a tune on me and Ron's next album.
Cool, man. Well, everybody, thanks for joining us. Tell your grandma about us. She would love us. We're sweet boys.
Yeah, we're nice
like
boys.
And subscribe and leave comments and all of that. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, bye everybody.
Except for patrons.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you liked what you heard and wish there'd been a little bit more of it, we got some good news for you.
Indeed, we do. If you check out patreon.com/audio unleashed, all one word, you can get new episodes a little earlier than everybody else.
And sometimes it's like a day or two early. Sometimes it's nearly a week. We never really know until we start editing.
But the big plus is that you get extended cuts of every episode. And usually that's going to mean a whole extra segment that's about maybe a geekier topic or something that's a little more personal to us or something that's just going to really appeal to the hardcore Audio Unleashed listener.
Yeah, what it boils down to is if you're somebody who would support Audio Unleashed on Patreon, we're going to make sure the bonuses to every episode are really aimed straight at your interests.
Yeah, and so if you want to hear these segments, you can subscribe to our Patreon for $3 a month, which is less than I spend every single day on my cup of coffee when I go to Starbucks to write my boring articles.
Yeah. One more time with that URL, that's patreon.com/audio unleashed.
Or audio
unleashed. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.